In the years following the American Revolution, the United States stood at a fragile crossroads, a young republic with vast potential but burdened by debt, disorganization, and uncertainty about its future. The Revolution had secured independence from Britain, but freedom alone did not guarantee stability. The nation's finances were in chaos. The Continental Congress had borrowed heavily to fund the war, issuing bonds and printing paper money that quickly depreciated in value. Both the federal government and the states owed vast sums to soldiers, foreign allies, and domestic creditors. Confidence in America's ability to pay its obligations was dangerously low, and without a sound financial system, the survival of the fledgling republic seemed uncertain. Into this uncertainty stepped Alexander Hamilton, the brilliant and ambitious immigrant from the Caribbean who rose from obscurity to become one of the most influential founding fathers. As the first Secretary of the Treasury under President George Washington, Hamilton believed that the key to national strength lay not only in political independence, but in financial credibility. His vision was audacious, pragmatic, and deeply modern. He sought to build a nation on credit, using debt not as a burden, but as a tool to unite the states, establish trust in government, and lay the foundations of a dynamic economy capable of supporting growth, trade, and national security. Hamilton's plan for America's finances began with the assumption of debt. He argued that the federal government should assume the outstanding debts of the states, consolidating them into a single national obligation. This proposal was controversial. Some states, such as Virginia, had already paid off much of their debt and resisted the idea of bailing out others. But Hamilton saw a greater purpose. By binding the states together under a shared financial responsibility, the federal government would strengthen its authority and create a vested interest among wealthy creditors in the success of the Union. Debt, properly managed, would be transformed from a liability into a glue that held the nation together. To support this assumption of debt, Hamilton devised a funding system based on the regular payment of interest to bondholders. He insisted that honoring these obligations was essential for establishing America's creditworthiness at home and abroad. Critics, including Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, protested that Hamilton's plan enriched speculators who had purchased depreciated bonds at a fraction of their value. But Hamilton argued that credibility was paramount, that the government's word must be trusted, and that financial stability required consistent and predictable repayment of obligations, regardless of who held them. In addition to assumption and funding, Hamilton envisioned the creation of a national bank, an institution that could provide a stable currency, facilitate government transactions, and encourage private enterprise. Modeled loosely on the Bank of England, the Bank of the United States would be a public-private partnership, with government funds deposited alongside private capital, ensuring both public oversight and private investment. This bank, Hamilton believed, would serve as the backbone of the American economy, a source of loans, credit, and financial discipline in a system that had previously been chaotic and unreliable. The proposal for the national bank ignited fierce debate. Jefferson and Madison argued that the Constitution granted no authority to establish such an institution, warning that it concentrated power in the hands of the federal government and wealthy elites. Hamilton countered with his famous doctrine of implied powers, reasoning that the Constitution gave Congress the authority to pass laws necessary and proper for carrying out its duties. A national bank, he argued, was not only constitutional but essential for the economic health of the nation. President Washington, persuaded by Hamilton's reasoning, signed the bank bill into law in 1791, creating a cornerstone of the American financial system. Beyond debt and banking, Hamilton also advanced policies designed to promote American industry and commerce. In his report on manufactures, he argued that the nation should not rely solely on agriculture, as Jefferson envisioned, but should encourage manufacturing, innovation, and trade. He proposed protective tariffs to nurture emerging industries, government support for infrastructure like roads and canals, and a framework for encouraging entrepreneurship. Though many of these proposals were ahead of their time and not fully adopted in his era, they foreshadowed the industrial development that would later propel the United States into global economic leadership. Hamilton also tackled the issue of taxation, supporting measures such as excise taxes to generate revenue for the government. The whiskey tax, for example, sparked fierce resistance in western Pennsylvania, culminating in the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. Washington, with Hamilton at his side, led troops to suppress the rebellion, demonstrating that the federal government had both the will and the means to enforce its laws. This episode reinforced Hamilton's belief that fiscal policy and national authority were inseparable, and that a credible government required both financial and political strength. The genius of Hamilton's system lay in its understanding of credit as a foundation for growth. By honoring debts, establishing a stable banking system, and promoting economic development, Hamilton sought to create confidence, both among citizens and in the eyes of foreign nations. Credit, once restored, would allow the United States to borrow when necessary, invest in infrastructure, and defend itself against external threats. In Hamilton's vision, prosperity and security were inseparable, and both depended on the trustworthiness of the government's financial commitments. Hamilton's policies were not universally admired. Jeffersonians condemned them as monarchical, elitist, and hostile to the agrarian democracy they hoped to build. They feared that Hamilton's financial system created a privileged class of speculators and bankers tied too closely to government power. Yet despite opposition, Hamilton's reforms endured, shaping the financial architecture of the United States for generations. His vision of a strong national government, backed by sound credit and a modern economy, proved far more durable than his critics' warnings. By the time Hamilton left office in 1795, the United States had transformed from a nation drowning in debt to a country with restored credit, a functioning national bank, and a coherent system of revenue and expenditure. Foreign investors who once doubted the Republic now viewed it as a reliable partner. Merchants, manufacturers, and entrepreneurs benefited from increased access to capital and stable financial institutions. The states, though initially resistant, found themselves bound more closely to the federal government by shared financial obligations. Hamilton's financial revolution also carried profound symbolic weight. It signaled to the world that the United States was not a fragile experiment doomed to collapse under its debts, but a nation capable of discipline, innovation, and endurance. At home, it underscored the principle that governance required more than lofty ideals. It demanded systems, accountability, and the courage to make hard choices for long-term stability. Hamilton himself, often at odds with political rivals, did not live to see the full flowering of his ideas. His life was cut short in 1804 by the duel with Aaron Burr. Yet his legacy lived on in the institutions he built and the economic philosophy he advanced. The Bank of the United States, though contested and eventually dismantled in its original form, inspired successors that carried his vision forward. His insistence on honoring debt and maintaining credibility became the bedrock of American finance. His belief in the value of industry, infrastructure, and credit anticipated the nation's transformation into an industrial and economic giant. The story of Alexander Hamilton's plan for a modern U.S. economy is ultimately a story of foresight, resilience, and the belief that financial systems are the skeleton upon which national strength is built. It is the story of how a young republic, fragile and burdened with debt, was given the tools to grow, prosper, and stand tall among the nations of the world. Hamilton's vision of a nation on credit was not merely a financial scheme, but a philosophy of governance, one that fused economic stability with political unity and laid the foundation for the United States as a modern power. His plan remains one of the most profound examples of how ideas, boldly conceived and relentlessly pursued, can shape the destiny of a nation.